Over the last 3 days, we've studied some of the basics of civil law. Now, normally, if we were in class, we'd do some case studies, and when we do these case studies, I would read a case aloud. I'd ask you questions. Students would discuss their thoughts here, and so on. A little bit harder to do case studies in that manner through e-learning, but I have three cases I'm going to read to you, and I want you to think about different aspects of things. Let's start with reviewing the elements of a lawsuit. Remember, for there to be a lawsuit, we must have these things. First of all, someone must be injured or damaged. Okay? And if there is an injury or damage, the person who injured them must have acted in one of these three ways, either intentionally, foreseeably, or negligently. And they must also be the proximate cause. They must be the reason why the person was injured or damaged. Okay, so if a person acted in one of these three ways and injured someone, then we have a lawsuit. Well, let's start out with this particular case. This was at McNeese State University in Louisiana. Let me read to you. It's not a very long reading. Let me just read you a little bit of this. The plaintiff, that's the woman who is suing, Heather Ryder was her name, was in line at a baseball field box office buying tickets on April 16 of 1997 when she was hit by a foul ball. The ball ruptured her right eye, tore her eyelid, and broke the surrounding bones in her face as well as her nose. So one of the things we have to look at is, was there injury? Well, without a doubt, she was injured. Again, the ball that hit her ruptured her right eye, tore her eyelid, and broke the surrounding bones as well as her nose. So there was undeniably injury. But was it the fault of the university? Now, the university has deeper pockets, so you wouldn't sue a baseball player in this case, but was the university at fault here? Well, they certainly didn't intentionally try to harm Heather Ryder, but were they negligent by not protecting her? Now, we talked about assumption of risk before, too. Now, remember, assumption of risk is sometimes you assume that you might get hurt. You take a risk there, and you can't really sue if you knew you might get hurt. Well, in a baseball game, you know you might get hurt. Like if Heather was sitting right here and a foul ball came off the bat and hit her, then she couldn't sue because there's an assumption of risk that you might get injured if you go to a baseball game. But there are some places where a school has to put greater protection, or a baseball field needs greater protection. Behind home plate is a good example. If you've ever been to a baseball game, you realize that they have a fence behind home plate to protect the people sitting here. If Heather would have been standing here, and let's say there was no screen here, and a foul ball came and hit her, then they would have been negligent. The school would have been negligent for not having a screen up, even though they wouldn't need a screen to protect somebody here. See, different areas. Or let's say that they had a screen up and it had holes in the screen and a foul ball came off the bat, came back and hit her in the face. They would be negligent in that case too, because even though they had a screen up, the screen was not in good shape. But neither of these cases, she wasn't sitting here, nor was she standing or sitting here. Heather was at the box office. So does the school have a duty to protect people who are standing in line to buy tickets? And in this particular case, the court said yes. The judge wrote that ballpark owners cannot be held legally responsible for every foul ball in common areas in a ballpark, but there are certain areas of a ballpark where protection is required. He said that that includes the area behind home plate, food and restroom areas, and the main ticket booth. So in this particular case, the court said that the ballpark should have put up protection in those places where you would not be watching the game. If you're standing in line to buy tickets or standing in line to go to the restroom or standing in line to buy concessions, your focus is not on the game itself. So you need protection in those places if you are injured. The jury broke down the damages. This is not uncommon. So she was awarded $485,000, but they broke them down like this. They said that she would get $100,000 for pain and suffering, $200,000 for loss of enjoyment of life, $100,000, excuse me, for permanent disability, and another $85,000 for past and future medical bills. Okay, let's break that down again. $100,000 for pain and suffering, $200,000 for loss of enjoyment of life, $100,000 for permanent disability, and $85,000 for past and future medical bills. Equals $485,000, all of actual damages. Now, the $85,000 for past and future medical expenses, so she probably had to have, some surgery or something that went on here. But she may need more surgery in the future for her eye or her face or whatever, and that is included in this particular lawsuit. All right, let's look at another one. This one is an underage party. In this case, a man decided to have a birthday party for his 18-year-old daughter. He opted not to serve alcohol at the party, but expected his guests might bring their own and drink it. He informed his daughter that he was imposing a rule that anyone who consumed alcohol must stay the night. A 16-year-old school friend of his daughter attended the party. While she was there, the host patrolled the party and became aware that some of the guests had brought beer. He made no attempt to enforce the overnight rule. The girl then subsequently left with another party guest. He was involved in a single vehicle accident, which left her with permanent brain damage. At the time of the accident, her blood alcohol level was 0.032%. The driver's blood alcohol level was 0.17%. 0.08 would be legally drunk in most states. He would have been twice the legal limit here. So the family of the injured girl sued not the driver, but sued the father. Now remember the elements of a lawsuit. Who was approximate cause? All right. In this particular case, you might say, well, the driver was approximate cause of this. Why not sue him? Well, he would have been. But for whatever reason, they didn't. Maybe because he's a teenager, probably doesn't have much money. Remember, you go after the person with the deeper pockets if you can show they're the approximate cause. Also, we don't know what kind of medical bills he has, or even if he survived the accident, at least not from this reading. So they sued the father. So the question becomes, was the father the proximate cause of these injuries? And did the father act intentionally, foreseeably, or negligently? And in this particular case, the father was the proximate cause, or at least one of the proximate causes. He hosted an event in which people were doing something illegal. They were drinking, they were underage. Okay, that's negligent. If you're an adult hosting an underage party and somebody gets injured, if you're providing a place for people to do something illegal, you're acting in a negligent manner. So he was acting negligently. He didn't call the family when someone left. He didn't try to keep people from leaving. He didn't enforce the overnight rule. He allowed people to break the law. So he was acting in a negligent manner, and certainly there were injuries and damage. Now remember we talked about comparative negligence? Comparative negligence is when the jury may decide that multiple people are at fault at this particular case. And in this particular case, comparative negligence was used. The jury said, the court found that the father failed to live up to his duty when he did not attempt to enforce the overnight rule. He didn't contact parents or the police about intoxicated guests and did not prevent the departure of intoxicated partygoers. They found that the father was 15% at fault. So he was 15%. So let's say that the girl who was injured, the family was suing for, let's do an easy number, $100,000. The father then was 15% to blame. He would have to pay $15,000 of that 100,000, and nobody would pay anything else because no one else was sued in here. Now maybe they decided that the father was 15% and the driver, maybe they decided that he was 85%, and that would equal the 100%. But they might have had other things too. Maybe they said the father was 15%. Maybe the driver was 70%. But maybe the injured girl herself was 15% to blame for her own injuries. If she knowingly got into a vehicle with somebody who was very drunk, he was twice the legal limit, are you somewhat to blame? Or would she be somewhat to blame for those own injuries? And I don't know what the jury did. They only, in this reading, it only says that the driver, or excuse me, the father was 15%. But it could have been divided between the father, the driver, and the injured girl herself. Because the driver wasn't sued, the family wouldn't get money, whatever percentage they awarded to him. And certainly you don't have to pay yourself. That's a pretty decent comparative negligence case. Let's look at one more. This one's a clogged toilet. This is a kindergarten girl. After a girl got sick in the bathroom of her kindergarten class, the teacher made her put on rubber gloves and manually remove a clog from the toilet. Lori Januska sued Bonita Springs Charter School after she said her 5-year-old daughter Heather clogged a toilet on September 22nd, and her teacher made her remove the clog as the entire class watched. Not the nicest teacher in the world, right? 5-year-old girl, kindergarten girl, clogs the toilet. Now, we find out a little bit later in this reading that the girl has, let me find it real quickly. I apologize. The girl suffers from an incurable gastrointestinal condition. Okay, so the girl clogged the toilet using it in the way you should. She has a condition that makes her have to go to the restroom. The teacher made her unclog the toilet while others watched. Now, certainly this teacher seems like an idiot. Why would you make it a 5-year-old do this? And certainly, why would you make her do it while people are watching? But the question becomes, was there any injury or damage? And if the answer is there's no injury or damage, then there's no lawsuit. Even if the teacher acted intentionally or it was foreseeably, or in this case, I think she was probably negligent. I mean, you could have a janitor come in and do that. She could have done it. If she wanted to teach the girl something, maybe done it in private when there wasn't the class watching. But how she did it seems really, really wrong. So she was negligent, but it really comes down to, was there injury or damage? There was no physical injury. She wasn't sickened by this. She didn't have to go to the doctor. She didn't get an infection, anything like that. So there wasn't a physical injury, but was there any other type of injury? The mother sued, saying that the girl suffered from severe emotional distress, pain and suffering, and mental distress. Now, sometimes we see these kind of lawsuits where someone is suing for mental anguish or mental distress or pain and suffering. Well, it's hard to put a dollar amount on pain or suffering. If I break my arm, let's say you punch me and I fall down and I break my arm, and I go to the doctor and, we can figure out the doctor bills of what it costs to make, my medical bills for that broken arm. But what about pain and suffering? How much is my pain worth? How much is suffering worth? And in this case, they're suing for pain and suffering. And I don't know if there was. I don't know how this lawsuit turns out. It's just something I want you to think about. Is, the injuries don't have to always be actual physical injuries. They can be mental anguish or things along those lines. If this girl was so embarrassed by this that she refused to come to school or put up fits on why she didn't want to go to school, and kids made fun of her and bullied her because of this incident, I think you could definitely show that there was injury. On the other hand, if the next day or even after this event was done, nothing changed. The kids all liked her. She didn't have a fear of going to school. Um, just went on like a normal day, even though the person acted in a negligent way, there wouldn't be any injuries if everything was normal and so there's no lawsuit. So this one's a difficult one. It's interesting listening to the discussions in class, but we don't have this discussion today. So that's where we will stop. Actually, I got a second. I want to tell one more story here. This one I don't have anything on here, but when I was in high school, we used to have we went to assembly in Bristol, where I went to school. Was a small school, so and there's a number of small schools around. So the a number of schools chipped in together for an assembly, and we went to Webster High School. So there was like Webster and Roslyn and and Bristol. Probably those three schools were all at this assembly. And you know how every assembly is. A person does something to get your attention. They juggle or they do magic or something, and then they give their story about, well, don't do drugs. Pretty much every assembly I've ever been to. Well, in this particular assembly, it was Elvis impersonator. Now, Elvis is, you know who Elvis is, but when I was in school, Elvis had died. He died in the 70s. This was probably in the mid to late 80s. Elvis was still fairly a big thing there. And when Elvis was alive and giving concerts, he used to point at the crowd. And they would shut down all the lights and they would point at the crowd. And they'd have a spotlight that would follow. In his hand, he would point and move his hand across the crowd, and the spotlight would go back and forth until he finally settled on one particular girl. It was always a young woman. And then he would sing his song, Love Me Tender. And it was, he's this musician, heartthrob, singing to this one person's Love Me Tender. Well, in this assembly that we went to when I was in high school, the Elvis impersonator did the same thing. He went back and forth. They had a spotlight on the individual, and he finally pointed at one of my schoolmates. It was Diane Shealy. She was 2 years older than me. And he pointed at her, and then he started to sing. But he didn't sing Love Me Tender. He sung another one of Elvis's songs. And that song was Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. And everybody laughed, and it was all funny. And I didn't think much of it, you know. And then from then on, though, Diane Shealy's nickname in high school was Hound Dog. Now, I didn't think much of that either. She was a couple years older than me, and I really didn't run with her, and I don't think I called her Hound Dog, but I knew that was her nickname. Now, I never thought of it at the time, but when I started teaching law, I started thinking, what a horrible thing. What a horrible person. Why would you do this to this girl? And I cannot believe that Diane loved the nickname of Hound Dog. I don't know how she felt about it. We weren't friends that hung out together or anything. I've never talked to her about it, but I could think in that situation that maybe his actions certainly were negligent. Why would you call a teenage girl a hound dog in the middle of hundreds of other people? So maybe there was some negligence there. Was there injury or damage? I don't know. There was never a lawsuit or anything at that time. But was there injury or damage? Did it affect her? I don't know. But if you could show there was, there could be a lawsuit there. Now, sorry, that got a little longer than I wanted, but this last lawsuit reminded me of that story.